Regular meeting of the Tinley Park Plan Commission for December 21st, 2007 to order. Start with Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Can we begin with roll call, please?
Croner,
Here.
Stanton,
Here.
Curran,
Here.
Engel,
Here.
Manny,
Here.
Gatto,
Here.
Gray,
Here.
Augustiniak,
Present.
Shaw.
Here. We have a quorum. In fact, we have a full house. Excellent. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thank you.
Do we have any communication from staff that we need to go through? Sorry, communication?
Well, your public hearing, did you put that up there?
Yeah, I do have that. I was checking
That's
to see if we
it,
had
that's
anything
the
else.
only
Okay. I do have public hearing notices here. So let's begin with approval of the minutes of the November 2nd, 2017 regular meeting. It was a ways back. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved Commissioner Augustiniak, second?
Second.
Second. Okay, do we, before we take a vote, do we have any corrections, edits, comments on the minutes? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes of the November 2nd, 2017 meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Okay, I would like to take a quick consensus among the commissioners regarding the order and the items on the agenda this evening. We have on the agenda a workshop and a public hearing, each for two topics. Under consideration here, I'd like to suggest that we dispense with the workshops for each and conduct public hearings, considering that we've been through some of these items several times before. The commissioners have had, I believe, time to go through these. However, if there's a feeling that we, on both, either, we need to have a workshop, we can do that. So before we move forward, just any thoughts on that before we alter the agenda here this evening? Any objections, I guess I should say?
Well, I would like to, discuss the amendments for the fence. The text amendments, the ordinance for the fence.
Okay,
We'll still do
so,
a full presentation, and you can still have a discussion,
All right.
make any changes you want.
yeah, so let's clarify that. Ordinarily, what we've been doing as protocol lately is we've been having one meeting where we have a workshop, and it's generally first time we see something, preliminary staff report, we go through, have a presentation, we have questions, comments, changes, they come back, and we have a public hearing with the staff from there.
Right.
But we've been through these piecemeal quite a few times. When we have the public hearing, we'll still go through all the question, answer, and the presentation and all that. If when we get through it all, if there's not, if I don't feel that there's consensus among the commissioners that we can move to a vote, we can always table the public hearing to a date certain and continue it if there's something, if there are enough changes that warrant a revision from staff. So, that's what I would propose. If there are no objections on that, I mean, we could certainly still do a workshop.
Yeah, I think, no objection, but I do want to, air my thoughts on the fence.
Can you speak
Excellent.
into the microphone?
Yes, I don't object, but, I definitely want to, voice my concerns on the fence, proposed changes,
Absolutely.
amendments.
And that's what the public hearing's for, and when we get to that point, if you're not comfortable, you can always make a motion to continue the public hearing.
Sure.
We'll move forward with that.
Commissioner Shaw, I too have a request to continue the workshop proceed with the workshop for the telecommunication service. I think there's a little bit more work to be done. that can be
Okay.
discussed.
All right. Well, that's fair. I certainly don't want to be rushing through the process, not giving it due diligence here. So we will proceed with the agenda as published. So item 1, regulations for telecommunications service facilities workshop, text amendment to the zoning ordinance, and we will begin with staff presentation.
So before you tonight, item number 1 is to review some draft regulations for wireless communication regulations. This includes not only cell towers, but also antenna co-locations, small cell antennas, and also distributed antenna systems. And we've seen a couple of these come through the last couple of years, and we wanted to really add something to our zoning ordinance regarding the small cell technology first and foremost. And when we looked at where to put that in the ordinance, we thought it might also be a good idea to clean up and restructure the way that the current ordinance is written. And so we hope that we're accomplishing those things by having this draft ordinance and having a lot more comprehensive regulations for some of these aspects of this new cellular technology. So with that being said, in your staff report, there is some background on telecommunications service facilities, or TCSF, and exactly how those can be regulated through the Telecommunications Act of 1996. So we do want to have a comprehensive ordinance that addresses all this technology and also leaves room for adding more code for more new technology in the future as well. So, without further ado, I can go through and review the draft, but I also have some photos for you of those different types of facilities. These are examples of freestanding cell towers that you see on the screen here. The first one is kind of a traditional cell tower, and the middle and right image are what we call stealth towers. So it's something that looks like a flagpole or looks like an evergreen tree. They are generally a little bit shorter and don't always offer opportunity for co-locations. These are co-locations. You can have multiple antennas on a freestanding pole, like the picture in the left, or you can actually co-locate antennas on buildings, like you see on the right. These are some examples of small cell antennas. They're usually placed on existing poles, often light poles, utility poles, often found in the right-of-way. And then distributed antenna systems. If you recall, some of you may have been here when the amphitheater wanted to have a distributed antenna system, or DAS system, and we did a site plan approval for that system within the last year or so. And it basically is like a Wi-Fi extender for your cell service. They are connected through fiber cables generally. You can have them outside, like we have at the amphitheater, where they have them on different light poles. And then they have a ground equipment area with a traditional enclosure like you'd see around the cell tower. And that connects to all those fiber lines to the actual antennas. And then you could also actually have one of these internal to the building. You'll see these sometimes in large office buildings or in hospitals, places where there's a lot of people, not a lot of good connection to cell towers in the area. So again, they just use this technology to sort of repeat the signal, if you will, inside the buildings. And these are typically not in the public right-of-way. They're more likely to be on private property. So, if you'd like, we can go back to looking at the ordinance here. And if you're okay with it, Chairman, I'll just go through some of the highlights and summarize it, and then we can obviously discuss in detail if there's any questions.
I think that's good for us. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we start off with the purpose and intent. We did not used to have this section, so I think this is important to show exactly why we have these regulations, and we can kind of point back to this when we need to. We have some exemptions for the village and any services that the village needs on their communications end. We have wanted to have village antennas on someone else's new pole before. If you remember the recent Prosperity Tower that we did, they have put that up, by the way. And so we want to make sure that the village is able to go on the different poles or place their antennas where we need them for the best communication that we need for the municipality. Next, we have general regulations. These are kind of the catch-all that applies to any of this technology. We also talked about how we have a preference for co-locations rather than new towers. So again, we want to see people go through and find potential opportunities to co-locate on an existing pole rather than build a new pole, because we're trying not to get a bunch of 100-foot tall poles in the village. We'd rather have 3 antennas on one 100-foot pole rather than 1 antenna on many 100-foot poles. Number 4 is regulations for new freestanding cell towers in antenna co-locations. And this goes through basically a hierarchy of where you're allowed to put new cell towers. And first it's on village property, then on other property owned by municipal bodies or districts, such as school districts, library district, park district. There's no sites available on either village or municipal district property, then you could go in the M1 district. So it's similar to how we have it now for our hierarchy, and we also then allow the ORI district at the end. So that's something that we talked about before, because that Crossberry site was zoned ORI, so we wanted to consider the ORI as a zoning district that we could allow these towers on. We then have regulations for yards and setbacks, location requirements, and conditions for new freestanding cell towers and antenna co-locations, such as maximum height, colors that they can use, so we don't end up with a hot pink or lime green cell tower out there. We also have co-location. If you build a new tower, you have to have a minimum of 1 co-location space available, so that we're not going to get any towers with just 1 antenna, or at least has the potential to add other antennas. Disguised towers, these again are like the flagpoles or the trees, monopines is what they call them, or other architectural elements. So again, it looks a little bit better than having a bunch of towers, and again, sometimes these do end up being a little bit shorter, so that's something to consider as well. Screening requirements, this has been especially important lately. We want to make sure that everything's architecturally compatible with the buildings that it's next to, that it has an enclosure with a certain material. Here we put masonry, and it has to be at least 6 feet tall, but no more than 8 feet in height, and a matching security gate that has structural integrity, which I know some would appreciate, and landscaping around the ground equipment enclosure. So those are common things that we see during the site plan approval process when we bring new cell tower applications to you. Then we clarify the approval process, and it talks about needing site plan approval and a special use permit and where they go to get those, and then also a building permit and potentially a lease agreement if it's on village property. Then we go through the co-location approval, and again, a special use permit and building permit. And that pretty much concludes that section about freestanding towers and co-locations. Number 5 is the regulations for small cell wireless facilities and antennas. We go through again and we talk about the location. This is something that we went back and forth with Paula, the hierarchy and whether or not we need that. It is in the draft that we have the hierarchy for where they would go, and that's something we were kind of debating. So similar
I don't know if
to
it's really necessary. I mean,
yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's necessary.
Okay. So we were trying to determine if in the right-of-way when we have the small cells, if we should preference that it's in a village-owned right-of-way versus a county or state-owned right-of-way. And I think it might be too hard to administer that and then also maintain the level of service that the cell provider needs. So we may take that hierarchy portion out of the ordinance here and just allow it in right-of-way.
Yeah, the options are so different because their radiuses are so much smaller. So when we see these, they're you know, there could be 50 feet apart or something, and they're usually on existing ComEd poles. The only reason I would see putting this hierarchy in here is if we purposely want to keep them off of our IDOT and our county roads. But at the end of the day, you know, we're trying to push them onto a village side street. You know, are we really trying to push them into residential districts? Not so sure.
Yeah.
And their options, you know, of what they're gonna say, they're gonna show you the RF studies, they're gonna show you that they're not gonna be able to be met on those, and that they need to be on 159th or 183rd. They're really not obtrusive like the other ones, they're very small.
And are these meant to be like boosters to the existing?
Yeah, that's the way that they, and it's really interesting, we had a sort of a flurry of inquiries about them maybe last year this time. And it's, I don't know, you know, you just can't keep up with the technology. We really haven't had much lately, you know, so I don't know. It's hard to stay up with the technology. Did we give them this thing?
No.
No. But at least we're safeguarded here. You know, there may be something after this. that
Right.
comes up.
If they're placed on like village light poles, does the village generate revenue from them?
If they were on our light poles, we would, but they'll go to ComEd probably first, because they're, I don't know, easier, or they already have. I know the one company already, that was gonna go down the railroad, they already had gone to ComEd because they had a relationship with them across the
So there's more to the staff report?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going through this, kind of through the draft here.
Yeah, that was just something we had discussed and never kind of circled back to finish talking about, so you know, we could take that out of this draft if you like, the hierarchy for small cells.
Yeah, we'll discuss that when we
Yeah.
get through it.
There is a separation requirement. We have in here that the small cells must be at least 500 feet away from each other, so we're not going to get one every 50 feet necessarily. But that way we don't end up with these things on every single pole down every single road. There are conditions that we want to just have one of these on a single pole. There's a certain surface area that we said was acceptable. And again, I want to point out too, a lot of this came from a model ordinance that a lot of other communities in this area are using. And we also referenced some of the plans that we had received when we had some inquiries about this last year. So I utilized those plans to help kind of structure, you know, what we would want to see from a small cell in this ordinance here. Again, some aesthetics with color, making sure that it matches the pole that it's going on. There's, you know, proper coverings, and there's no guy wires, and then listing the approval process as well. And then the number 6 in here is regulations for the distributed antenna systems. Again, there's location requirements, different conditions that talk about the surface area and height and the color, screening as well. If there's any associated ground equipment that needs to have that enclosure with the privacy fence, those types of things, landscaping around it, and also we go into the approval processes for this. So the goal with this is to be very clear and still be able to have, you know, aesthetic regulations for these types of things that make sense for the technology, because as much as we don't like the look of cell towers and antennas everywhere, we all have our cell phones and we need service to those phones. So hopefully this is a very clear, happy medium with regulating for the village to have not only good service, but nice looking service. And that's all I have with the actual regulations for section 3. We do have some definitions that would be added to section 2. If you'd like to go over any of these, I'd be happy to, but the terms are antenna, antenna support structure, cabinet, co-location, distributed antenna system, all right, and others.
And others.
So if you have any suggestions or questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Okay. I suppose we'll start here with questions. It sounded like we had some. The floor.
Yes, I would suggest that we go to page 3 of 10, and this is under point 3, letter H. It's at the top of the page, structural integrity. And I'll read it. Are you everybody there?
Yep.
Okay, a TCSF, including antenna or antennas, other component parts, and all related equipment anchorage, shall be designed to withstand the wind force referenced in the applicable building and/or electrical codes currently adopted by the village, including loading, without the use of guy wires. And what I want to get to is, I went on the village website to look at the applicable building codes. And in my experience, in my industry, the building codes aren't sufficient. They may address wind, but you were mentioning a comprehensive, to kind of bolt us into the new millennia here. And typically, in my experience, what the standard that is used for telecommunications is TIA standard 222-G, and I actually have copies to hand out to everybody, just so they have like a reference. And then I have the copy of the existing ordinances for Tinley Park. I'll take a couple next. Sure. Keep one for. I got one. I got, yes. And so it's the telecommunication structures and antennas, and it's the Telecommunications Industry Association standard. And this is what's typically used for designing of these, not the building code. I know the building code may address wind loads in buildings, but this is an acceptable industry standard. And what I would say is, my understanding that it's not included with the current village codes. If you could verify that, and if that is the case, what I would recommend would be to look at possibly adopting this, the village adopting this as a standard going forward, so that it can address a lot of these issues going forward comprehensively for future telecommunication antennas, standalone structures, everything that you mentioned under the umbrella of this document you provided us with. And in addition, on that same H note, as I read it, it mentions, and I'm going to continue where I left off, as part of the permit application process, the petitioner shall provide the village with a structural evaluation of each specific location, establishing that the proposed installation meets or exceeds the standards described herein. The evaluation shall be prepared by a structural engineer licensed in the state of Illinois. And that is good. That's good to have. I would also recommend that in addition to prepared, add stamped and approved with structural calculations by a structural engineer licensed in the state of Illinois as well. And that's to kind of keep it very transparent on when they submit something. Last, in my experience as well, if you're going to put a structure that's 100 feet high, it would be very highly recommended that you have a soil boring in the footprint area of such tower structure or monopole or whatever. And the reason being is the language in this this packet mentions about the safety. And wind is, it may be a nebulous force. People don't realize the extent of it. A couple weeks ago when we had the big winds, there was a Citgo station off of Pulaski where the canopy fell because of the wind. Wind is a very realistic force that we have to deal with. And so to protect the village and the people inside the village, I just want to make sure that that structural integrity portion of the ordinance can get fortified so that it protects the citizens and we get good engineering out of it as well.
We're lucky to have a structural engineer on the commission.
I'm a geotech, but I know something about structures too.
But I will tell you, and I'm really glad for that information. That's nice to have this expertise. We do, as a matter of course, require sealed drawings from a structural engineer on all of those. And they'll look at soil borings, they'll look at self-collapsing, all of that. We actually have a consultant, what's his name? Max. Who reviews all of those, and it's
Excellent.
beyond building. So it's really, when we get into towers, we look beyond the building code, but you're absolutely correct, and these are great suggestions.
Okay.
So what I would perhaps suggest, give me some guidance here, my perspective on how the municipal code, how our codes are written, laid out, is that we have a zoning ordinance which covers zoning. It gets into some detail here with this one here and some of our others. You happen to mention here our building codes, and I'm certainly not familiar with the structural side, but things like National Electrical Code and that sort of thing, where villages typically, rather than write their own electrical code, they adopt a national standard. So to your point, I don't believe TIA is adopted by the village as a standard. I don't think, unless staff advises otherwise, I don't think that we should necessarily go to that level of detail in the zoning ordinance, but perhaps the
Yeah,
village.
the references here really have to do with like the enclosures and the shelters, so
Right.
you'll go to the building code to regulate that. What this
Right.
is being clear is that we make sure that the structural engineer stamp is on that relating to the tower.
Yep.
So I think the comments are great. I didn't have that reference, the TCF reference, and it wouldn't hurt to put that in there, but.
Absolutely. And to his point, rather than a specific reference, whatever the village does to ensure that that we've adopted current code. I know just recently there was some adopting more recent codes
Yeah, we're
to get up to date.
2012, but that's how the
Yes.
ICC code goes.
I said more recent codes. But those are excellent additions. So for this evening, I'd be looking for, when we get to the public hearing, for you guys to think about how we might rewrite that particular section, what sort of level of detail we need in the ordinance for zoning versus what we're referencing. And then if there's a recommendation that we need to make for this to be adopted by the village, we should do that as well.
Commissioner Shaw, if I may interject, just for some clarification, here is like the summary. I gave you just the front cover, just so you know what the standard is. The summary of the standard is, this standard provides the requirements for the structural design and the fabrication of new and the modification of existing structural antennas, antenna supporting structures, mounts, structural components, guy assemblies, insulators, and foundations. So it's pretty all encompassing, and it's very specific to what we're talking about versus a general building that may have some applicable things, but not totally be comprehensive in covering what the structural engineer would need to be. And if we want to be clear on what the village expects, I would highly recommend that we put some wording, if this, I'm putting the cart before the horse, if it does get adopted, or something to that extent. That's all.
And I may be wrong, but I don't think we actually have to go back and change the building code. What we can do is reference it here in the zoning code, and I'll work
Right.
on some language here for when you get into the public hearing, and if that's satisfactory, that's what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
That's fair.
But thank you.
So you still have the floor. Any other questions, comments?
No, that's
Forward?
why I wanted the workshop. Thank you.
Excellent.
I just had a couple of small ones. I'll turn first to we can go page 1 of 5, paragraph 2. And then we also reference it on page 4 of 10, paragraph 1, regarding the hierarchy and going to municipal body or district. I just really believe that we should pull Park District and School District out of that as potential districts to put these things in. You guys seen, or the town has seen, how the residents and the parents of, I think it was Helen Keller School, had a major issue of having any of these antennas near the kids. I happen to agree with it. I know there's no scientific evidence that there's anything wrong with them, but why subject ourselves to potential issues like that? So I would just recommend that we pull off the Park District and the School District as additional districts that these antennas could go up at.
But they have the ultimate authority. This doesn't force it to go on.
I
anyone's
understand that, but
properties.
let's pull it out of here, because even though they have the final authority on saying whether or not it could go on there or not, it's the town who's going to grant the what do you call it,
The special use, but you have
Yes.
2 checks there. I mean, for example, if you eliminate that, then you take away the right for any other taxing body who may want the tower there, even for their own use. So it would have to go through them first, and then obviously it's going to come through you, through a special use.
I understand that, but again, you've got kids around, and the parks and the schools all have, for the most part, I think you'd be hard-pressed to not find 1,000 feet between a house and Park District property, a residential house.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I mean.
So
Well,
really
I'll
quick-
tell you what, John,
The Park District currently has 3 cell towers.
they do now.
Yes.
In residential areas?
In larger parks.
Which ones? McCarthy has got one,
Community
probably?
Park has, Community Park has 3, they actually have 4. And
Doesn't Bulk Woods have one?
Veterans Park has one. Yeah. Vote Woods, I'm sorry, Vote Woods, not Veterans.
And the rec center too, right?
Yeah, that's Community Park. Yeah.
So before we move forward with that, and Commissioner Croner, I agree with your point. So I had in my notes here, I was going to ask at the end, but what I wanted to understand was our rationale for the hierarchy. So we have in here that the preference is for village-owned property, other public entities, et cetera, and then so we list a hierarchy. Before I just kind of go off of opinion, whether it's Commissioner Croner's or mine or anyone else's, I just want to understand the rationale.
Why?
do
The
we have
rationale,
this?
it goes back to paying back the people are impacted the most. So, whether you think it's a visual blight or whatever, let's get the money back into the taxpayers' hands as best possible. So that's, every community does it this way, quite honestly. You want to, if we're going to have to live with the visual blights, and what other perceived impact would be, let's try to get the money back into the taxpayers' hands. So we start with us, and then we go to any other taxing district.
So is it fair to say that it's more of giving the public entities first shot at the taxing or at the revenue generated from it versus forcing them onto public property? I mean, that's the perspective? Okay. So.
I mean, one might argue park districts usually have a little bit more land and opportunities, but at least in my discussion over the years, and this goes back before we even had the Telecommunication Act, we've put all those on our property so that we would get the money. Or we would want to make sure the school got the money or the park district got the money.
So that makes sense if we look at it from that perspective. I certainly wouldn't want to be in a position where we craft things in such a way that if we had a school district that wanted that revenue source and perhaps had as much land as a park district might, if we structure it a different way, it could be perceived as we're denying them that opportunity.
Yeah, I don't think, I can understand your concern about that, and I tell you, that going back, because I was doing these things before we had a Telecommunication Act, and actually had a community where I made every home be, down to a certain milligauss reading before we would allow a home from a high-tension wire. And, Telecommunication Act took away all those rights. But I would be concerned, you don't want to take away those opportunities, but I don't believe the way the hierarchy is set, that it's necessarily saying we're advocating it to be next to children or children's playgrounds or anything like that. It's just providing the opportunities for these taxing bodies to make some revenue if necessary.
And I know over the years, the Park District has accepted some and rejected others.
Yep. School as well.
Yeah.
There was one recently, I forget what school that was, over by Bob's house.
Well, there was a time a couple of years,
Andrews.
probably 3 years ago.
Was it Andrew High School?
And it was the time when we had one at Helen.
No, I'm talking about even after that.
Oh, after that?
After that. There was one within the past year, a year and a half, and it was going along, and, the school will call us first and will say, hey, this is pretty controversial, you guys take this through your boards and so forth, because really, the school district or the park district should take the heat about this first if this is something they want. And so they did that, and then eventually the project never got past their board to come to us. I believe it was Andrew High School was where it was going to go, so.
It was the one that was rejected by Kirby 140, that they looked to move it about 100 feet onto District 230's property.
This was going to
'Cause it
go
was
into
gonna
a
be
light
on-
pole by a football field.
Yes, that was at.
Is that
It was at
Atwood?
Andrew.
McAuliffe
It was going to move off,
McAuliffe.
there was a site at McAuliffe,
Ah.
and then that was going to move, it was AT&T wanted to put it at McAuliffe. At the end of the day, the 140 board rejected it. They wanted to move it about 100 feet onto 230's property. So that's,
Yeah, I think you're right. I just think there's some checks and balances that should give you some comfort about this, that and I understand your concern very much, but I think there's some inherent checks and balances within actual
And not
tax.
every school district site necessarily has children at it. There are districts in our village that have buildings in the industrial areas on Duvon Drive.
Right.
And that could be
DeVry
potential
and-
sites that wouldn't
yeah.
be residential at all.
Right, DeVry, and what's the other one over there, yeah.
There's offices too.
Okay, so,
There's pause.
so if you could
Not taxing.
clarify how the hierarchy works here. I've read through this a couple times, I just want to be clear. If a tower were proposed, the due diligence burden is on the petitioner to demonstrate that there's no suitable location on village property and all the other potential, so they have to go through all of them before they can go to a private
So
location?
basically, if you want to go in an ORI district, you have to first prove that you can't go on village property. And then you have to prove you can't go on one of those other taxing district properties. And then you have to prove that you can't go in an M1 district. And if you can prove all those three things, then you can be considered for a special use permit. And so they would submit their due diligence and their research to us. We would have our consultant that we use for these types of cell structure analysis. We'd have him take a look at that and confirm that that's indeed true before we'd even be bringing it to the commission or the board for consideration.
So this kind of codifies what we're currently now doing, where all that has to be satisfied before it comes for a special use
Yes.
before the village. You know, that way we're not put in a position where the village has approved something that hasn't been through the other entity yet. Right?
And just to clarify, it's currently in our code this way. It's maybe rephrased a little bit differently here, and then we added the ORI as one last step. Because
Okay.
right now we end at M1, and we don't really give another option, but because we have ORI districts that are kind of similar to the M1, there's not really like a big differentiator when you look at some of the properties that we have. I think it's important to note that it could be an appropriate site to have it in ORI as well. So it opens up that as an opportunity if you go through those other steps,
So the preference is M1 over ORI as the last decision.
as of right now.
Okay. So, given the discussion here, you.
Yeah, I'm comfortable, especially with what Commissioner Harris said. I wasn't thinking about school district property where there's not schools within a residential area, and that's something that should be thought in. So as long as we have all these checks and balances, I'm comfortable with that then.
Okay, good. I'm glad we kind of worked through it.
Yeah, no, it was good. The only other thought I had, on page 3 of 5, paragraph D, the last couple of antennas that the commission has approved, we required PVC fencing. Because we were shown some photos of current fencing with the cyclone fencing and wood fencing that was in disarray. And a thought was that we not just say fencing, but maybe we require, or we say PVC fencing.
We say
or
masonry.
No, I'm looking at page 3 of 5,
We don't have a
paragraph D.
5. 3 of 10, you mean?
No,
After it.
it's under 5,
Regulations,
for personal wireless service facilities.
it's a different sheet.
Oh, you're not talking about page number.
I'm talking about page 3 of 5, yeah.
Yeah. Got it in the same
Yes, we have one section that is 10 pages
Yeah,
long,
yeah.
and then another one that's 5 pages long.
Oh, that's the current regulations.
Right.
Yeah, that's not what
So-
we're proposing.
So there's a draft of what we are proposing, and then that's the current regulation.
Have we put PVC fencing? I didn't, I saw masonry and.
Just look at the one, those were the existing, look at the
Right.
one where we're proposing, and it's 10 pages long.
Right, where is that covered, where we
That's
talk about
on
PVC
page-
fencing?
Page 6 of 10, under screening. This is where they mentioned before, if you look at, kind of in the middle of the page there, it says screening and then number 2.
Right.
All associated ground equipment shall be screened by a masonry enclosure at least 6 feet in height and no more than 8 feet in height.
So are now we saying that instead of fencing, that it must be a masonry enclosure?
We had actually always said masonry, except we've had some, the ones that have been recently happened to turn out to be PVC, but like when the school districts that those were all masonry. Kind of like our trash enclosures, we try to
Right,
match the
I
building.
understand fully, but the last two that came in front of the Plan Commission were both PVC, including the World.
Well, that's because the police station already had PVC.
They actually, well, they had chain link,
Oh,
so it was an improvement.
Right, police station had chain link, and that was one that was in disarray, it had not been kept up.
That particular site actually has quite a few gates, and I don't know if the masonry and all the gates that they needed would have been the most practical solution for that.
So
one.
would we be better to say by masonry enclosure or PVC fencing?
they'd have to get a variance, so it gives you the opportunity to say no. This gives you the default position, which is the highest bar.
Okay.
And then they gotta come before you anyway for a special use.
So we're saying, in the ordinance, it'll say masonry enclosure, if they want to do anything else, it has to come in front of them.
They're gonna be before you anyway.
Okay.
Because it'll be a special use, so it gives you the most control.
Good with that, myself.
And a sturdy gate.
Is it feasible to make it a masonry enclosed building? Is
Not a
that-
building, just enclosed like we do our dumpsters, a 6 or 8 foot wall.
Because the Park District required them to have an enclosed building.
Oh.
And they all met the enclosed building in order.
Yeah, they all have enclosed buildings, but even around those, we've required enclosures. Some of them have equipment on the outside,
Oh,
and
okay.
things like that. Yeah.
We had, just all the equipment was required to be inside.
Yeah, okay.
Around the base of the tower itself.
Right.
A lot of times you have an ice bridge going to the cell tower, so you want to have that enclosed in something.
Thank you.
Down this side?
I'm comfortable with the conversation that we've had on the adjustments, and I'm comfortable with that presented.
One more comment. The 100-foot maximum, I just want to know, how was that determined?
That's our current requirement.
Okay, and so-
I also clarified that that does not include the lightning rod that can go on the top.
Okay.
Typically, those are about 5 feet tall from what I've seen. So that's just the monopole itself could be 100 feet. And by clarifying that, in the past week, we haven't determined whether it's the top of the lightning rod or the monopole. So that helps, and that actually gives them a little bit extra room to have a co-location on there too, because we're counting the monopole rather than the actual top of the lightning rod.
And I thought I read in there somewhere that there could be some petitioning if the signal is, there's a special interference with the signal, if that's correct.
I believe that's in there as well.
Okay, thank you.
There's FAA too. Once you start getting, I think it's 122 feet is where you have to start lighting, and for FAA rules, I think it's 122. You might know. So most communities stop at 100, but I've seen variations going up to 110, 115.
I've seen one 195 feet in Countryside
Yeah.
that's proposed, so,
Yeah.
yeah. 100 sounds reasonable.
Okay, starting all the way down at the end here, any comments, questions?
Just a clarification on page 3 of 10, number 4A. For them to prove that no other means is available, how do they prove that? Do they have to have letters from the other
It's a lot
bodies?
easier than you think. They give you an RF study, and there'll be rings. And so they do this as a matter of constant protocol to see where their calls are dropped. And so they'll tell you where they need to be. And so they're going to be in that area, and so there's a fairly defined area of what's in there. So we don't have to go look at every Park District property, or every, we don't have to, we just have to look at where their cell phones
Whether there's a
are.
park within that area or a school within that area?
Right.
Okay.
It's interesting, because we went through that scenario with Prosperity, and we almost got them on village property, and then we found out it really wasn't ours, so.
Then I'm assuming on that study too, gives you like, what's the optimum height that they need to get the best
they'll tell us
performance,
that.
right?
They'll take the best spot.
Right.
But it's interesting, some of them won't take the highest spot, because they want to maximize their return. If they're building a tower, they want co-location, because they'll get money off of that. So we went higher on the Prosperity one than they did.
Yeah, we would have been.
We got the top spot.
As subletting spaces can be lucrative.
Mr. Manning, any questions?
No, it's just a
Right.
comment, so.
Nope.
Okay, excellent. covered most of my questions here. The last one I had on here was, you made a comment about potentially removing the hierarchy concept for small cells, and it sounded like that was up in the air. From what I'm seeing, I mean, the rationale still holds true either way. Is there some reason why we might find that too restrictive if we did that?
I just don't know. We've
We've
talked
been back
about
and
it
forth.
several times, and it doesn't hurt, I guess. It does no harm. I just didn't know in practicality whether it was gonna even be something enforceable, and we haven't seen that anywhere. I mean, we created that way. It wasn't,
We created that.
yeah, no, the other model ordinances didn't have that.
Okay.
And I just, we talked to Public Works to see where these requests were coming in, and at the end, I think the thought was we're overdoing it, really.
We could be, and we don't want to, I don't think we want to be having all of these necessarily on only village streets, because I think our more highly trafficked streets are not village streets. It's, you know.
Plus, it just makes it more
LaGrange and
administratively
Harlan.
more difficult for us, it just,
Yeah. So,
I don't care, I don't feel really
That seems
strong.
fair. I would agree in general that, we're already looking at a proposal going from a 5 to a 10-page ordinance. And so I would be fine with striking that. It
Taking it
is
out, okay.
still a special use anyway. So there's
Absolutely.
discretion, and we're going to be discussing it.
Yeah, you could have them in here and you could say, hey, did you go look at 159th or something? I mean,
Right. So on that note, I would suggest that we strike that part there. It sounds like you're prepared to do that anyway, without taking it to a vote. Any concerns on that point, questions from the rest of the commission? Okay, hearing none, I think we'll go that way. Last question I had here was just on some of these numbers you had as far as distance from structures, residential, et cetera. I know you went off of our own existing ordinances as well as some model ordinances. Were there any industry professionals, engineers that you at least discussed with? So there's some basis for why we would have that, or is it just practice, common practice?
I think it's practice. I think a lot of times when you look at these nuisance uses, 1,000, is that what we have on there? 1,000?
it depends which regulation.
For
It's
cell
a little
towers?
different.
So you're kind of getting to
They
what
get
my
into
point
the-
is about being consistent as a village in our principles.
1,000 feet out of
Yeah, a lot of times, just a standard of the industry, tattoo parlors or adult uses. And a lot of ordinances, 1,000 feet is sort of the common distance that you see with residential, so. I mean, you
Okay.
can make it whatever you feel comfortable with.
No,
You're gonna have to
my
defend
point
it.
is just what is our basis for it? And it sounds like that's exactly what it is, so
It is.
I'm comfortable with that. And if there are no other concerns about that,
I do, you brought up a great point, Commissioner Shaw. I know in here, they mention in the 1,000-foot requirement, but then it has, and I'm not sure what page I'm on here, 5 of 10, the top of the page, note II, it says, a freestanding cell tower and the associated ground equipment must be set back at least 10 feet from the principal structure, and then 10 feet from property line. So, but that's also in addition to that 1,000-foot criteria. It's not
Oh,
like.
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is just like a side yard setback or.
Fair enough, okay. Thank you.
okay? So I
can suggest some language based on Garrett's recommendation if you want, see if Garrett
Yes.
thinks this is, Garrett, see if this meets your needs. So, again, like I said, I don't really see we need to go into the building code. So on page 3 of 10H, where we're talking about, shall be designed to withstand the wind force referenced in the applicable building and or electrical codes, which there still are some, including the TIA standards, and then just in parentheses, TIA 222-G, and then including this revision of TIA 222F.
You may want to clarify the language to most current.
Okay.
That way they use the most current standard because it is technology and it will go pretty quick.
You know,
Yeah.
another one, or is it,
Amended
amended from time to time. We use
Cor-
that term over again.
Correct. That, I saw that in here, and that's good language. My understanding is that the most recent is TIA 222H,
Oh, so-
dated October 5th, 2017. That's
Okay, so I
my,
think as amended from time to time will keep us safe.
yes, yes.
And then, and you're absolutely correct, we require sealed drawings, but just by a structural engineer licensed in the state of Illinois with drawings sealed with a professional seal.
Yeah, and structural calculations.
That's what they are required.
Okay, I mean, they have the plans, of course, and the specs, but, okay, fair enough.
The soil blend.
That's all included in the structural engineers.
Okay. That-
So that's part of
Okay.
standard engineering review, though, is
Yes, it is. We
Not
have a
that-
really good consultant.
Not that there's any harm in putting it in here, but to your point earlier, is that overkill if we go to that level of detail?
About soil borings, it's part of structural, we require all of that. The structural engineer has to verify that it is structurally sound.
Right, correct, because they're not, there's their name on that drawing, so.
Absolutely, and it's the
you
same
don't want
thing with any construction.
Right.
You require a stamp. I'm just saying, as part of the zoning ordinance, is it necessary for us to go to that level? I'm fine if we do, and if that's the consensus. I just want to make sure
Fine.
we're being efficient in how we do things.
My professional opinion would be, or recommendation would be yes, because like even the building code has generic tables or values, but nothing beats site-specific. And we're in Tinley Park, and there's some organic soils, swamps, and so if you're going to put up a structure 100 feet high, when you design the foundation for that said structure, they have to know, are they putting it on a deep foundation, a caisson, like 50 feet deep for overturning? Or in a lot of instances that I've seen, you go with a very big, shallow spread footing, like 30 by 30 or 20 by 20. And so
Okay,
you
how
put it
about
shallower.
Including geotechnical verification of structural soundness,
Geotechnical verification of structural design,
structural design, okay.
because they're putting that on the soil. So the soil has to support their structural design, and it works hand in hand for overturning.
Got
Are
it.
those points included in these standards? Or are those separate standards?
No, that's a good question, Commissioner Shaw. In these standards, and I have them with me, they mention geotech report. They also have their own table standards, which are not for Cook County. But as I said, the soil, not all trees in the state of Illinois have 50 branches, and the soil changes from where you guys are sitting to where I'm sitting to where Commissioner Shaw is sitting. Mother Nature is not exact, and so to protect ourselves, you do the due diligence, and it's incidental to the cost, I'm sure, of them hiring the structural engineer anyhow. So do their due diligence rather than take a table number that may or may not be correct. That's my professional recommendation.
Yeah, I would,
Doesn't
I don't think that's undue burden. I mean, if I was putting up a 100-something foot tower, I'd want to know that it's going to not fall down. So.
And in my own experience, I've seen jobs where somebody starts digging and then realize, oh, we can't put a shallow foundation here because it's all organic material. Let's get a geotech engineer. Don't do that. Make sure that your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted when they submit the design plan, so that you do it right the first time.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
So you're comfortable with the draft language that she has there?
Could you read it again, Paula?
Sure. This last part, the evaluation shall be prepared by a structural engineer licensed in the state of Illinois, and including geotechnical verification of structural design with drawings sealed with their professional seal.
That's fair. Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So any other questions from the commission as we move forward from this workshop? No? Okay, good. So it's going to be a little out of the ordinary because we're moving into a public hearing. Let's see if we can navigate this
Yeah, you just
efficiently.
open it and.
So we'll see if we can navigate this efficiently.
You need a
Next-
motion, Chair, to go into public hearing?
Absolutely.
I'd like to make a motion, we move into public hearing
I second
on
them.
the text amendments, regulations for telecommunication service facilities.
I second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Can we get
Who seconded?
Can we get a roll call vote to open the public hearing?
Croner,
Yes.
Stanton,
Yes.
Curran,
Yes.
Engel,
Yes.
Manning,
Yes.
Gatto,
Yes.
Gray,
Yes.
Augustiniak,
Aye.
Shaw.
Aye. Okay. And I would just like to acknowledge that I do have a certificate of publication for the public hearing. And public hearing is open, and the petitioner is the village, I believe, so we can dispense with swearing in. Any interested persons who would like to speak on this? Seeing none. I've already confirmed our public notice, and this is where we're going to navigate to be a little efficient. The next item on the public hearing is a village staff presentation. If there's no objection, we'll dispense with that as a matter of record. The workshop that we just had, we'll include that in our findings of fact. And I think about the only thing we would really need to do when we get to that point would be some confirmation of language. Next one would be any objectors? Seeing none here. Really nothing to rebut. So we're moving quickly through our public hearing. Any questions while we are in public hearing by any of the commissioners? Hearing none. We would have any closing remarks from any folks here? No? So, while we are in public hearing, do we have any public comment? Seeing none, moving forward. Do I have, right here, we have the option, if we feel we're comfortable to move forward, we can close the public hearing and then we'll move on it. But before we close the public hearing, I'd like to get consensus that that's what we'd like to do. Otherwise, we can continue. Is there any concern about closing the public hearing? Okay, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. And actually, we took a roll call vote before. I don't think we needed that procedurally, right? So all in favor of closing public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Okay, public hearing is now closed. So I think we moved rather quickly to this, but I think everyone's kind of in consensus on in form and on the language. I would like to just confirm here that as proposed in our staff report, the two changes that I have noted, one would be to strike the hierarchy for small cells, and the other one would be the inclusion of the language that Commissioner Gray suggested. Is that consistent with everyone's understanding? Excellent. So with those two, do I have anybody who would like to propose or make a motion on this item?
I'll be glad to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the village board approve text amendments in section 2 and section 3.v. of the zoning ordinance related to regulations for telecommunications service facilities, including but not limited to regulations for new freestanding cell towers, co-location, small cell, and distributed antenna systems as indicated in the staff's draft text amendments dated 12/15/2017, and with the two revisions that we have agreed to.
Two revisions and deletion. We had the deletion.
And deletion, as we had agreed to.
Great.
Okay, so we have motion Commissioner Croner. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Augustiniak, and we will have a roll call vote now.
Augustiniak,
Aye.
Gray,
Yes.
Gatto,
Yes.
Manning,
Yes.
Engel,
Yes.
Curran,
Yes.
Stanton,
Yes.
Croner,
Yes.
Shaw.
Yes, motion carries. Excellent. So moving on to agenda item number 3, which, as published, is a workshop. Considering our experience right there and navigating a little bit for the public hearing, Do we have any objections if we go straight into the public hearing and conduct the staff?
Just as a note, do you have it listed here how many meetings we've had on this?
Oh my gosh.
We probably have 10 meetings on this.
Yes, and that's a fair point.
Zoning board and.
And just I want to recognize, we do have a member of our ZBA here tonight. Thank you for
Yes,
taking
it's
the interest.
Commissioner Gaskell, right? Is that Commissioner Gaskell?
Yes.
Thank you for joining us this evening. And when we're in the public hearing, by all means, if you'd like to make some comments, you're more than welcome. So with that, are there any objections to dispensing with the workshop and conducting the workshop type activities within the public hearing? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Moved Commissioner Stanton, second Commissioner Augustiniak. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, we are opening a public hearing. Once again, our petitioner is the village. I can confirm that we have had proper public notice for the hearing, and we will now move on to staff presentations.
Well, like we've discussed before, we are looking at new regulations for fences to be a little bit more clear than our current regulations and account for some of the issues that we've been seeing. We've had quite a few variance requests specific to corner lot fences, and we wanted to try and mitigate some of those concerns that we've had with fences on corner lots, and reduce some variance requests that we've got for those types of lots. However, as we've seen, and you might see in the fence regulations themselves, not every specific property is going to fit easily into these regulations. So there will also probably be some case-by-case analysis through a variance request, just based on some of those unique properties. So it's not going to solve every variance request and every property owner concern on corner lots or some other lots, but we think that it's a much needed improvement to the code, and I think that our zoning administrator will have a much easier time administering this rather than the current code. And that's our goal too, because I know he has to deal with a lot of frustrated homeowners, and anything we can do to make it very clear for our residents as well as our staff is the goal here. So we did look at this, I believe back in September, the Plan Commission, if I'm correct. And this amendment is similar to what you saw in September, but we went through it one more time and tried to make it even more clear and also address some concerns that you guys had at the last meeting as well as the zoning board. We had some discussions about materials and where fences should be allowed. Added a couple graphics in here, talked about some aesthetic and safety concerns. So similar to how I went through the last text amendment, if you don't mind, I'll just sort of brush through some of the topics in this one. And if you have any questions, if we wanted to help you go over them for you. So we start with a permit required section. We talk about when it's required, who is exempt, and when you don't need a permit. There are regulations then for all zoning districts. There's a table that talks about your lot type and then your yard type. So you just find your lot type and then the yard type, and you know where your fence can be located. There's a reference down to a different section that talks about special conditions when you have a certain yard and a certain lot type. We talk about right-of-way, drainage, and utility easements. This is something especially that public works really like to think about this ordinance when we look at it. That we won't allow private fences in right-of-ways. They have to have written approval for being in easements. Cannot obstruct access to utilities, and similar things like that. Also, we talked about the clear vision triangle, and how fences shall not obstruct sight lines or cause a negative impact to the safety. A lot of these regulations are about safety because fences can truly cause obstruction when you're in a vehicle trying to make a turn. We also want to be concerned about people on the sidewalks, and the fact that you'll be able to see little Billy riding his bike down the corner, and to be safe on sidewalks and not just streets from vehicle to vehicle. Then we go into regulations for materials. We talked about needing to be durable, weather resistant, in good condition, structurally sound, the allowable materials, prohibited materials. We talked about a maximum height here, similar to what we talked about with the cell antennas and the monopole and the lightning rod, we clarify the top of the panel versus the top of the post. So the top of the panel can be 6 feet, the post can be 6 feet 6 when measured from grade. And there's a new graphic there to help illustrate that as well. We have a new section about administrative approvals, which I think is going to be a great tool for a zoning administrator. And this talks about where you can have a fence in a secondary front yard that can be administratively approved. So it doesn't have to go through the variance process at the zoning board necessarily, or if it's in the legacy district, then the planning commission needs to do that. But in the secondary front yard, there are certain standards. You can have an extra 10 feet into your front yard setback, so you still wouldn't get it at the property line necessarily. You'd be getting, if you have a 25-foot front yard setback, you would have your fence at a 15-foot setback from your property line. That's sort of how that would work. So you would get 10 feet into the requirement. We don't have a setback in a residential district that is less than 25 feet, so this means the closest you'd ever see it meant to be 15 feet per this code here. You have to meet all the material requirements. You cannot have a chain link fence in a front yard. We wanted to go with something that would be more aesthetically appealing than the chain link. Although you can have the chain link if you meet your required setback. We just didn't want to encourage it in a front yard. We want to look at those wood, PVC, wrought iron type materials instead. It does have to be a maximum of height of 4 feet 6 at the top of the post or 4 feet at the top of the panels. The fence must be open or decorative in style and have a minimum of 50% open space. So this again kind of keeps it at open style, white picket front yard fence look rather than a privacy fence in your front yard. The fence would not be obstructing sight lines or causing a safety issue. And this is a tough one here, but we tried to explain with the graphics. The last one is the fence cannot abut a neighboring front or primary front yard. So if you see in the graphics in this draft here, let me put this up here, I'm sorry, but the primary front yards are all in yellow, and the secondary front yard is in orange. And
It's not in the PowerPoint.
Sorry.
Just look in your staff reports.
If you look in the draft there, this is page 4 of 9 in the draft. Follow along. The scenario here that we're trying to show is when you have a secondary front yard next to a regular front yard. So if you have an orange next to a yellow, they're usually not going to interact very well together because in the yellow front yards, you're never going to get that bonus 10 feet like you would in the secondary front yard. And they often have their driveways there, or there's an opportunity for a potential conflict with the visibility sometimes in these scenarios. So we are wanting to clarify with this last regulation. If you look on the next graphic, if you have two secondary front yards next to each other, then where that location is shown on there is an appropriate location for a fence in a secondary front yard. So to be very simple about this, when you have two oranges next to each other, it's good. If you have an orange and a yellow next to each other, not usually a very good looking line of the street. Any questions about that? Good. Hopefully that makes sense. And then another thing is that when you have a circumstance where there is a non-conforming, 1920s house that was built and it's set back 12 feet from the property line, the zoning administrator could only give you 10 extra feet. And so your fence would still be 3 feet behind where your house starts. So we wanted to be able to let the zoning administrator or their designee allow the fence to align with the home. And in that case, since it's aligning with the home, it could still be a 6-foot-tall privacy fence, whatever material they want, because it's not in front of where the home is necessarily. Those seem to be some of those scenarios where the zoning board and the village board feel pretty comfortable with letting the fence align with the home.
So that's probably the biggest thing that we're changing is that those would not come before you. So we want to make sure that, true, the zoning board, we want to make sure everyone's comfortable with that because that's being put in the hands of the staff.
Obviously, we make sure that it does not obstruct sightlines to any property, because even though one person's house was built, at 12 feet, the next person could be meeting 25 feet. So we would make sure to look at that on a case-by-case basis. And if there's an issue, we would recommend, angling it back or, using.
We got the clear vision
Yeah.
triangle too.
Exactly. So there would be a review for the safety impacts of that as well on the neighboring properties. The other thing is with a through lot, a fence may be permitted along the property line if it directly abuts a public right-of-way. So those people that back up to 80th Avenue, they'd be able to put their fence on that back property line, provided that it's determined that that should be considered a side or rear lot line based on the established development pattern. So if you're the last person on your block that's on 80th Avenue and you haven't put up a fence yet and everyone else has, we see that that's where the fences should go. However, if you're one of those lots that's oddly flip-flopped along 171st Street or some other major thoroughfare, we would want to make sure that we're not negatively impacting the 9 other houses that are facing the other direction. So in that case, that person would potentially have to come ask for a variance to put it in a yard that directly abuts a street where it really doesn't match the pattern of everyone else's lots. So again, for aesthetics and safety, we wanted to make sure to address those and clarify those. We have a short temporary fences section for construction purposes or special events. And we have a section on non-conforming fences. It talks about legal and illegal non-conforming fences. We clarify here that fences that have a permit on file are the legal non-conforming fences, and you're allowed to do minor ordinary repairs and maintenance, an 8-foot wide section every year, and you shouldn't change or alter the fence in any manner that would increase the degree of non-conformity, so you shouldn't move it further out into the required setback or make it any taller or whatever it may be, because eventually it does need to come in compliance when its useful life is over. An illegal non-conforming fence are those constructed without a permit. Unfortunately, we do have several of those that we've found over time doing our variance research, and they should be removed by the property owner or a variation should be obtained. So if we do find that someone has an illegal fence, we do want to give them the opportunity to potentially get a variance, but they should really be coming into compliance with these codes. And then lastly, we have a section on appeals and variations that says how to appeal when the zoning administrator has an administrative authority to say yes or no to a fence location, or how to get a variance. We reference section 10 for that. And then we have related definitions as well, and I can go through those if you would like.
Fences.
Excellent. Okay. So moving forward, thank you for the presentation, for all the information, all the efforts that went into that, and many meetings.
Chairman Shaw, can I make one point on the fences?
Absolutely, that's where we're going next.
The, great job on that. And the requirements are very well listed out, which are good, very good. The part that I get concerned with is that there doesn't seem to be any final inspections on fences. So somebody goes in, gets a permit, they pay $50. It doesn't really say what they're getting for that $50. It says what the requirements are in that. So I didn't know if there's something that we could list that'll say that, to reassure, because, some people might feel that a permit is kind of a reassurance that they're going to get a job well done because, they paid for a permit, and whether we're going to do a final inspection on it or not. But I think it would be something that could be, a good move on our part if we could do it. Now, I don't know how many permits are pulled in a calendar year for fences. But again, even if there was if there was 100, let's say, that, even if we did 20%, so 20 is better than none as far as doing a final inspection. And if anything, that would keep these fence companies, because there's a lot of them out there. And also, anybody can drive around. I'm sure you really start paying attention, you'll see good jobs and bad jobs and how they're done. And to me, one of the biggest eyesores is when somebody goes and they raise that fence up. Now you got a gap on the bottom of the fence. It's ridiculous and how that is. So anyway, just a thought.
No, I would echo that, and I think you and I may have spoken about this before at one point. The permitting process should be a two-way proposition, right? To that end, the village has certain requirements, and the folks have to go through the permitting processes and meet all the requirements, but what are they getting for it?
Right, exactly.
And to your point, if there was some mechanism in there, I think that would be good.
Right.
And even if it's not practical to get out there and do a final inspection on 100% of them, if it were some
Right.
sort of sampling,
Mhm.
and as well, this may be getting into a little too much administrative red tape, but what's the recourse for the homeowner who put in a fence, had a contractor, and went through the permitting process, and with or without a final inspection, they had some sort of failure
Right,
a
right.
couple of years later, what's their recourse there?
Exactly.
Can the village provide any muscle or assistance
Mhm. Right.
to help them?
So-
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think a major component of that is that, first of all, the resident or the contractor should be calling for the final inspection. And right now, our current software unfortunately doesn't poke at us, when that hasn't been completed. So something that we've been working very hard on is the RFQ for new software for permitting. And that is a requirement of the new software, I believe, that we will be reminded of when we have outstanding inspections. And that's a process I think we're
Yep.
going through
Just
in the
got
next
them
few months.
yesterday.
So we're reviewing the qualifications that we've received and looking forward to being better with keeping track of all those inspections, because right now it is a lot of just whoever calls for the inspections, I think, and we're doing what we can with that. And definitely we would like to make sure that all the fences are installed correctly. And I can say whenever we get a fence that goes through the variance process, I have personally gone out there, or our zoning administrator has gone out there to ensure that it's done accurately.
Stephanie, may I interject? I think that's a good idea brought up by both commissioners. To supplement it, let's use technology. Put the onus on them of taking some pictures either during or right after installation, email it, and it gets sent into a file so that you have it memorialized in time, what it looked like, how it was put in, because you can't be everywhere. It's just it's too expensive to do that. But if you're going to do 20%, you could supplement 100% by having the onus on them. Everybody's got a camera with a phone on it. Most people do, and take a picture or a
It's our
few,
responsibility.
and send it. Send it.
Almost a
We
self-inspection
do,
process.
there's 2 inspections with every fence. There's the post hole inspections,
Yeah.
and then there's the final inspection. And the post hole always happens, and we
Yeah.
get triggered by that by the Julies. Because
Oh, yeah.
when they call the Julies, we know what's happening.
Yeah.
As Stephanie mentioned, one of the biggest problems we faced in the community development department, and primarily the building department, is our software is very antiquated. So
Mhm.
that's what we worked on recently, just got the RFPs responded, I think it was just yesterday, or the day before. And so right after the holidays, we're doing interviews, and we're gonna get that going over the winter. That's the big project.
Okay.
No, I know my brother just put in a shed, and so he built it himself. So they came out twice. They came out originally to inspect it, and then once he had the ground in, and he couldn't put the roof on or the walls up or something until the main platform was installed correctly, and then the guy came back out and the foundation of it, and then he could put the walls up and the roof on top. So I mean, they came out 2 separate times for that. So I don't see why.
Same with fences, but
Yeah.
what will happen with the shed and won't happen with the fence,
Mhm.
the person with the shed will call for the final.
Yeah.
People with fence just
They don't do it.
Right.
Okay.
Or they think that the contractor already took care of it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's not unusual to Tinley Park.
Okay.
The communities I worked before were smaller, and so our inspectors just had eyes on the street and they saw it. So
Mhm.
it's just, we are working towards taking care of that.
Okay.
It's the same with signs. We weren't doing final inspections with signs, and they were not ending up in the right location.
Okay.
So
But I think,
things will get better.
well, to help enforce that, like Commissioner Gary mentioned, taking a photo, couldn't it be on the applications indicating, when they fill out the application for a fence, there could be a little section that says, I, the owner, will take photos, whatever, you know,
I
just kind
have
of.
a sort of just a philosophical opposition to that. They're paying a permit, that's our responsibility to do that. I don't have any verification of what they're actually taking a photo of. It's really us that should be doing that.
Well, right, you know, or, you know, again, this is just something to try to help it streamline the process, right? Or just having a note asterisk saying, you know, fence must be, you know, called for inspection. If not, if it was not built per what was, you know, the drawing you provided, you know, you're gonna have to, you know,
That's
adjust it.
actually good.
Well, something, you know, something, so at least, you know, they read it, you know,
Yeah.
you signed it, so you can't
Right.
say, I didn't know. But if it doesn't exist on a paper, then people can say, hey, well, I didn't know.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you just add it, you know, I think it's simple to do, and then it's like, okay, well, you signed it, you read it, you know, correct it.
So the permitting process is, it's more of an administrative function. And from the zoning ordinance perspective, we're only mandating that they have a permit. The process for getting
It's
it,
really distinct.
verifying and all that, it's an administrative function. It's really important, and I think the consensus in here is that the final inspection's really important, and there's probably some improvements that can be made there. Sounds like we're gonna go down that road. With respect to the content of the proposed ordinance, any additional comments or questions on what we have in there?
I have a comment on the page 1 of 9, number 4, prohibited materials. I thought we had previous discussions about reflective material as being a prohibited item for fencing.
Page 1 of 9?
Oh, I'm sorry, 3 of 9. The number 4, prohibited materials. It just goes chain link fence with slats, glass, barbed wire.
That's a good point.
I thought I had that.
I think that's what glass was supposed to be, was reflective.
I can add that next to glass /
mirror.
reflective.
Because it could be metallic, yeah. I think we had a picture you had in one of the
Yeah,
workshops.
It was like a mirrored.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't put that up here this time. I know you guys love that one.
So, to avoid getting, too detailed in this, is the consensus is that we're comfortable that just simply saying reflective is adequate? I mean, I'm sure there's some
Yes.
sort of engineering standard on reflectivity or something, but I don't think we need to go there, right? I mean, just, we'll leave it to the discretion to say that's reflective. So, fair
Zoning
enough?
administrator will review.
Excellent. Okay. Well, good.
I got one question.
Sure.
If it makes sense or not, and this is kind of piggybacking on Commissioner Stanton. As you go down 80th Avenue, Brookside Glen, and you look at some of those fences, there are some fences that have a foot between the bottom of the fence and grade. Or some are built on grade like they should be. Should we put, in your nice drawing here, Stephanie, a maximum height of the bottom of the fence to grade to stop that from happening? Because some of these guys are putting up a 5-foot fence, and they're getting 6 feet out of it by putting it up. I mean, some of those fences are really bad.
That's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, so.
So it's not just because it came up out of the ground, it's because they set it that high to
The
begin
posts
with?
are in the ground, they just raise it up off on the post. See, the post is taller than the fence, right? You get a little bit of height there,
yeah.
so they're just raising it up. So
Oh,
now they're
here I
getting that
was-
6-foot fence now becomes a,
Now, some
You know.
might,
Thought we had
but
Yeah.
most of the time it's doing
Right.
what.
Because I know,
Tim said.
like, ours is pitched up quite a bit now, over
Yeah.
the years. And
Yes.
after 1 year, they won't do anything for you. I
Right,
mean,
you have to
Stephanie
pay,
even looked
you have to
into it.
pay somebody to
Yep,
come out and pound the
resync the
fences
post.
back in. yeah.
Yep.
But then that raised panel is not due because of the contour of grade, you know, because sometimes you see people or, you know, contractors install it,
Yeah.
and like, well, from point A to B, you know, your land slopes, so they put it at one height and then just carry it
Right.
across, which looks silly.
Right.
Or they don't step it, you know, it's just more of a design
We should step it down.
point of view, and, you know, and you have to figure it out, you know, at least the owner should say, it should look like that, you know.
So, let's take a step back and discuss what what's the principle that we're looking at there, or what are we trying to regulate?
We're just trying to stop it from
Being
Yeah, the
bottom
fence is
and
being,
grade.
bottom of the fence being a foot off the grade.
What's the, and admittedly, I'm the devil's
Uh-huh.
advocate here, what's the concern? Aesthetics,
Aesthetics
public
is
safety?
probably the biggest thing. Aesthetics
Aesthetics.
is probably the biggest thing.
Definitely.
We're just trying to picture
We're
that.
measuring 8 inches.
I thought we did have some criteria in one of the workshops that gave it a maximum
I was
height.
saying that too. I thought we had some sort of max.
There was language
Well,
in
there's-
there.
There's a maximum on the height. I don't.
I mean, from grade to
Grade.
bottom of
Oh.
slat,
Right.
there was, I remember, I think it was 6 inches, I want to say. I can't, but
Yeah,
it's
I
been a
remember
while.
something like that as well. We can certainly do that, you know, we had discussed before, you know, you certainly want to make sure there's enough for drainage if that's an
Right.
easement there.
There's a maintenance
underneath
issue if you
ground.
sink it right to the ground, especially with the wood fence, right?
Well,
It's
it's the
gonna
drainage
wake up.
issue too.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not saying that it should be right at grade, but
We
certainly
could do a
shouldn't be a
maximum
foot
of
high.
6 inches. We could, you know, maximum of 6 inches is there, maybe?
Yeah.
You comfortable with 6 inches? Okay, we could do that.
At a maximum.
Yeah, maximum 6 inches from grade.
Mm.
Between grade and the bottom of the panels.
Mhm.
Yes.
Is that simple enough to administer? mean,
I
it's
think
not-
so.
I think if they got a situation like what Eduardo was talking about, they just would have to start stepping down. I mean, when it gets to be such a gap,
Mhm.
step down the fence.
Right, and that happens.
And,
depending
yeah,
on
they
the
do that.
areas.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if there's an exceptional situation, the zoning
Right,
administrators can
right.
review it. And if they can't come to a decision, then it's gonna go to the ZBA, right?
And they would love to hear those kind of.
Okay, all good points. So we got that covered?
Yep, I've got 2 amendments.
Okay.
Is what I'm hearing.
Did we get down this side? Questions?
All right, well, I have comments again, most of my comments are just to streamline the process. Because, we should be focusing on, bigger, better things than fences all the time and having variances and, I think we could, kick it up a notch, let's get our village, working, more efficiently. So my comments right now, let's go to, if we look at page 409, so we're looking at the second item, the fence meets all materials requirements with section, section 3J to be indicating, however, the fence cannot be chain link. I'm thinking of other homeowners that. My point, I think I want to say is, chain link versus a nice vinyl fence, there'd probably be a good price difference. So are we being unfair, unjust to a person to say, I can't afford a nice vinyl fence, whatever a chain link fence is.
But this is only, this is only when it's in the front yard.
Right. We're talking about the secondary front yard, right? Or is this,
The
or
secondary
both?
front yard.
Okay, right, but still, regardless,
But it could be next to a house that it is their front yard.
Right, and I understand too, if you had, fences abutting another property, that sounds good, but still, just the point of saying, hey, I can't afford, I want to provide one.
They could put it at the setback, they just wouldn't get that
They wouldn't get
10-foot
to come out.
bonus.
Well, no, right, but that's my point, if they did want to get it, put it
So
out.
it's really in your face when it comes out. They can
And-
come for a variance.
And you
Well,
could
again,
do just the
my
portion.
ideas are, try to, streamline this whole thing, they say, do we have to really go to the ZBA, because I want a chain link fence versus a vinyl fence, I can't afford it, or whatever, is it a hardship,
Well, that's a fair point, and this is one of those sort of policy decision points that the commission's here to make. And if the consensus is that chain link is just not appropriate in that area, then that's what the ordinance would say. If we disagree as a
Right,
group,
right.
then we would strike that, right? So that's a decision point we're looking at tonight. Do we
All right,
do we have that in there as read or as proposed, or do we strike it?
correct.
To me, what you're saying about administratively,
Mhm.
being more efficient, if we believe that we put that in the ordinance and then a lot of people apply for a variance, goes to the ZBA, and it's, approved 80, 90% of the time, then effectively we're allowing it, but we're making people do a lot of extra work to get it.
Well, but I think what you're saying, because if you adopt this the way that it's here, what you're saying as a group, and what we've heard up until now, and our trustees and everything, is that they don't want to see chain link in the front yard. And so what should be happening then is somebody wants a chain link in the front yard and it goes to ZBA, ZBA should be denying it.
Right.
And so, the ZBA wants direction. I mean, they want to know what our preferred policies and aesthetics of the village are. So if you disagree with that, and if you want to see chain links in the front yard, then this should not be in here. That's simple.
And that's exactly the point I was trying to make, and I was trying to make sure that it was really clear to all of us that the language as proposed includes that, and that's kind of the decision point that we're at.
Yes,
No,
making a
correct.
policy.
Right, and that's how when I read this, and even, took a drive around all of Trinity Park to see, what we have, what looks great, what doesn't, kind of like the photo I presented, the last time. But then I sent you additional photos. I don't know if
Yep,
you.
I have them up here if
Okay,
you'd like to.
so I'll.
Do you want us to put the pictures up?
No, not right now. Let me just go through my comments here, and then we can look at the
Can
photos.
I make one comment
Shoot.
about the chain link fence in the front yard? I think it's important to note that history of all the front yard fence variances that we've had, I can't think of one off the top of my head that was chain link, because we continually encouraged the petitioner to use a different material, and they were always okay with that. So I never had someone say, we can't do that, and it was,
Can't afford
they
it.
were able
Well, right,
to
I mean,
do it. And both the ZBA and the village board would approve PVC or wrought iron or, wood-style open fences primarily. So we're trying to be consistent with the materials that have been approved in the past. When we
Right,
wrote this.
right. And like I said, when I did take the drive around, and it was kind of like half and half. It was 50-50. But I'm just thinking of that person said, I do want a fence, but, I can't do it, or for again, as a hardship, that's going to just cost too much. I want the fence, and I can do it, it's.
I think it's a decision
But
that you
but
have to make, like, what do you want the village to look like, and what is the direction?
I
we
understand
want
that,
to
right,
go?
but then we gotta think of the residents, hey, they want to provide a fence and make their home, utilize the outside, fenced in, security, everything that comes with the fence, but, you're making them, I can't put a chain link, but, being coated or not, but, but that's my comment though. I think I have, an issue with that. The next one being item number 4, when we talk about being 50% open, and I brought that up the last time. But here you have a line saying the fence must be open or decorative. So what's the difference between open and decorative? We need to define that.
I believe we have a definition for open style fences.
Well, I know open, but then you say or decorative instead. So what's decorative?
It's kind of synonymous. Decorative, if you have like a special looking post, or, it has sort of like a historic look to it. It's meant to be a more aesthetically pleasing looking style of fence, but it needs to be 50% open spacing.
Okay.
That's a fair point, and I think as a matter of clarity, it could read either way. It could read as this or that, whereas I think the intent of what you wrote is a clarification that open could also mean decorative.
Well, it reads word for word, the fence must be open or decorative in style and have a minimum of 50% open space between the rails.
Right,
So
so
it's very clear that this is the style, but regardless of what your style is, it has to be
It's
open.
Right, because it could be
And
just
that's
be
what
your
the
simple
definition
square
is.
post, whatever, no cap, no nothing. I mean, that's open. Then decorative, I'm putting a nice little capital on it.
Yeah.
But again, so I think we should just strike decorative because it doesn't, I'm allowed to put a 4x4 post and, I'm good. But decorative is like,
Any fence type could be decorative, it just depends.
Well, right, but I think open or, because to me, I read it open or decorative. Okay, well, what's the decorative portion? I don't like the open 50% or, so, I think that just makes it vague or, it's like, because again, every day I look at code and I read it and then I go, that sounds vague. I gotta call the city and what are you talking about? But if you're just telling me, oh, decorative, a nice capital, or I want to get someone to etch in some nice carving into it, it's just, just clear, again, to clean up the language, I guess. But then explain to me, 50% open, we're looking at a 30-foot plank. So we're expected to have a 3-inch gap, for an 8-foot section, right? Now I'm thinking this as a life safety issue. I know, my main background is commercial, so when we have like railings or fencing or whatever, they're between the planks or bolsters or whatever, it has to be less than 4 inches, for a child's head won't go through and, fall or what have you. But if a person selects they would like to have a nice wide plank, a 6-inch plank, which is 5.5 inches, right? And so then that open space has to be 5.5 inches, right? So if we're providing life safety safeguards for commercial property.
This isn't a life safety issue at all.
Well, just give me a second. For commercial properties, whatever, we have all these life safety mechanisms to make sure nothing happens, right? But at home, and I know that residential code's different, because you could, what's allowed in commercial, you could do in residential. But I'm thinking if you do have a fence at the perimeter of your home and you have children, what's going to stop your kid, if you're not watching them or you're doing whatever, a child could easily go through the fence, and then they're out, out in the street, on the sidewalk, and so there's no safeguard for that. There's no life safety, mechanism to prevent something like that. If we provide it in a commercial construction, we should be doing that. In fencing, right? Because you want to keep security. You want to keep whatever's in that fence, corralled. Not making sure they're not, accidentally getting out. And then two pets.
Can I just add? I think in fencing in the front of the house like this, it's usually done for a decorative purpose. It's not done, I don't think, for security purpose or for.
Well, no, yeah, but I'm just saying, just in general. I'm talking about that open space. If someone wanted to get, a 6-inch plank, which is 5.5 inches, in reality, but you create that, that little opening that would allow, a child, a small age to,
Right, but I mean, if.
And that's what, we want to prevent. Again, in commercial construction, we have code that, stairs and whatever, any type of fencing that provide, that has that mechanism that, it won't allow a sphere of 4 inches to pass through.
But why should we discriminate against a craftsmanship house and someone who wants a craftsmanship fence out front? It's usually the fence is out front. And previously, in the olden days, 50s, 60s, chain link fence, keep everybody in. I mean, it's the German way, right? You surround your house, it's your property, you surround your house by fences or by bushes. But I think most of these fences now, when they come in for a front fence, it's done for a decorative purpose.
Well, no, right,
and I don't think we should I think we're getting to a point where we're trying to over-regulate these decorative fences, and I don't think we really want to do that. We want to let the ZBA decide whether or not this should go up or not.
I also think we're going beyond the scope of the plan.
No, but I think my main point is, saying 50%, like how I made my point or my comment the last time was I want it to be, say 25 to 50, because again, it's decorative, it's based on the homeowner, but I'm going to go to my.
I think, though, the purpose of the zoning ordinance, the purpose of these fence regulations has nothing to do with safety in this aspect. This isn't a height, you're used to working with the architectural requirements, and I understand that, and we have railing requirements. It's a prerogative of the landowner whether they want to make sure that their children are kept in.
Oh, no, correct. I mean, exactly, so,
And if it's 4 feet, they could probably climb it pretty easily, too.
One other important point I want to make sure that we're all considering, this section that you're talking about relates to the administrative 10-foot bump, the bonus.
right.
And the trade-off of being allowed that is that it's the open / decorative style, et cetera. If somebody wanted a 6-foot privacy fence, they could do that at
Back where they're supposed to be.
line.
Well, yeah, but not at the.
Administrative.
So what I'm trying to understand, really what your concern is, you're worried that the spacing between is gonna be too wide?
You know, depending on, you know, what's
And then you just
selected, you
think of
know.
the stock fences even to purchase. I mean, the fences that they purchase traditionally have understand that those are gonna be used, and they are already built into the design of those, you know, the size of a kid's head and maximum
Mhm.
spaces. So I think we're over-regulating, honestly. I think we're going too far.
Well, okay, well, let me just continue and then, just so I could get through, you know, my thoughts here. So then 50%, where did that, you know, number come from? You know, why 50%?
It's a standard of the industry for that definition.
Okay, so you're, okay. But you just, okay, we're just picking just a stand, you know, whatever.
American Planning Association.
Okay, so that, you know, okay, again, you know, I do this, you know, on a daily basis, so, you know, I don't see that standard industry. It varies, you know. I understand that, you know, we want to make our communities, you know, look great, whatever, so, you know, there should be flexibility. If you look at page 7 of 9, at the top, no, that was just my note on 7 and 9, but I guess, can we define just privacy and open, just in general? When I think about privacy, I want a privacy fence. It's totally, you know, there's no gaps or nothing, because, you know, totally blocks that out. But in your definition, it says construction of the surface area of any segment such a fence is more than 50% opaque.
What's your question about that definition?
Okay. I guess I took it as, you know, it could be, you know, from 0 to 50, you know, if you had gaps in it, it's still considered a privacy fence.
Yes.
Okay, so
50% is that threshold, so.
right. Okay, so I think, you know, to me, you know, my opinion, like I mentioned on the last meeting we had, you know, if there's already a 2-inch gap, you know, it's not private anymore. You know, anybody walking down that sidewalk having that fence at the perimeter, you know, you can see my yard or anybody's yard, right? It's not private anymore. Private makes it when you can't see, when you have to make, you know, an attempt to try to look over the 6-foot fence or what have you.
Yeah, so I
You know,
think
that's my
you're
interpretation.
wanting a semi-privacy fence definition versus a privacy fence.
No, I'm not saying semi. I'm saying you get privacy and non-privacy, you know, or open, you know. So once you have gaps in it, well, you know what, let's go to the photos, you know, that I provided.
They're on the, so by that definition, this is still
Okay.
a privacy.
Right, again, you know, I know you guys consider privacy fence, but when I was on the sidewalk, I could see in their yard, so there's nothing, you know, private about it. You know, I consider that an
More
open
private than
fence.
open.
You know, the planks are 6 inches wide and you got an inch space. You know, you could see
We don't
it.
really care so much how private a fence is. That's up to the homeowner. What we care about is how open it is. That's what we're trying to regulate, because we want it to be open for sightline issues and to
Mhm.
make sure that it sort of fades away in the background. When we have something that's intruding our front yard, we want to give a homeowner some rights so they can secure their dog and their children,
Mhm.
but we want that fence to be as invisible as possible. So we don't care if they're happy with that and it doesn't give them 100% privacy, that's their prerogative. All we really care about is that it gets as open as it can in those areas that we don't want it intruding on a front yard streetscape. So I don't think it's necessary to regulate how private a fence is. That's their business, how private they want it.
Because
I know,
right
right,
now-
but in the code you're saying it has to be 50% open, you know, so you're already regulating, okay, it has to be, you know, to me, that looks like, wow, you know, you're like, you know, from up close, I could see, you know, your, you know, what's happening, but then from far away, you know, it's, you know, it's apparent, you know, yeah, it's open, but, you know, I guess you're taking away, you're making it too open. Why not just say, okay, your fence could be just made up of 3 verticals, and that's it, you know, when, you know, it's too open. I think to me, it's like, you know, having a 50% is just too wide, not aesthetically pleasing, you know, and I'm looking at it as, you know, with the eye as a designer. But go to the next photo. Okay, and that, you know, that I consider privacy fence, you know, same style. I can't see in their yard at all. But again, that fence is closer to the home. But if a fence was at the curb or at the sidewalk, you know, I still can't see in their home. But the previous one, you're able to, you know, so there's no privacy at all. So if we go to the next photo, now that photo, the verticals are 3.5 and the spacing is 2.5. That doesn't meet code, but it's still open. You know, it fades away. You know, that looks fine. And then if you go to the next photo, maybe the next one, one more. Okay, the first fencing is at the front, the grayish brown. Let's see. They're utilized in a 6-inch plank, and the spacing is 3.5 inches. So that's something, if I want to buy that at, I think that was Home Depot, I can't buy it because it doesn't meet code. The one behind it, the white one to the, you know, to the left, it's the planks are 3 3/4, and the spacing is 3 inches. So that one doesn't meet code, so I can't buy that one.
Wait, Commissioner Manning, can I ask a question? I apologize.
No, go ahead.
I'm looking
go
to
ahead.
follow. Where does it say in this code that you can only put up a solid privacy fence? I don't. That's
No,
what I'm looking for.
No, I'm calling this as an open fence, and right? Because, you know, code saying has to be 50% open. So whatever my plank size is.
That's for the secondary front entry. Which
Right.
Is the only
Just
way,
for the
that's
bonus
all.
area.
You know,
But you're showing backyards. and
No,
I'm
yeah, I
trying
was
to-
just looking. Well, the first one was a side yard up to the sidewalk.
Okay, but it went around. It looked like it went around the entire yard.
Well, you're right, but it
So
was still.
really quick, to avoid getting hung up on semantics, because I think what you're saying and describing these is accurate, from a matter of writing a zoning ordinance and then administering it, just for the sake of clarity, if we ignore open, private, those words, and we just said a type A fence and a type B fence, right? In order to have a fence in that administrative 10-foot secondary yard, it has to be a type B fence. And we define a type B fence as one that has at least 50% space. Everything else is a type A, and you can use it wherever else, whether it's 100% opaque or you know, what have you. You can use a type B fence there too, but if you're in that space up there, you're only allowed to have a type B fence, right? So if we think of it in that terms, whether we use the word private or open, you know, it kind of, I see where you're going on the semantics of it.
No, but I think my goal is to, you know, streamline. Why does it have to go to the ZBA? Just like, you know, have it, okay, we have this clear code of, you know, fencing, you know? So it's like, oh, it meets it. But if we want to go beyond, and I want to add, I don't want a 6-foot fence, I want an 8-foot fence. All right, well, let's now go to the ZBA, because then that'll be obtrusive. It's too tall, you know, to be at the.
Are you talking about in the
edge.
secondary?
No, at the secondary, at the sidewalk. You know.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the intent all along has been that administrative 10-foot bump has been to reduce the number of variances needed.
Oh no, yeah, right. But I'm just trying to say, just get a step further. You know, try to, you know, like, yeah, this fits the criteria. You know, we don't need to, you know, go for variance. Only if it was obviously you know, that deviation from it. You know, I want, you know, 8-foot fence, not 6. You know, then let's go and talk about it and then see, you know, how it's gonna look, or, you know, it's kind of like, you know, too crazy. But still, you know, still to my point with the pictures, you know, say if I was gonna wanted to have that fence at the sidewalk, again, just based on these fences, like, hey, I like that one, but I can't use it because it doesn't meet the requirements. So my choices are becoming less and less and less because these pre-manufactured fences don't meet the code.
Well, I think that was the intent, that there's a certain amount of leeway given administratively, and there's a trade-off there, but only to this extent.
Right.
And if that's not enough for somebody and they want more, then they have to go through the variance process.
Right, exactly. You know, so that's what, again.
But, I mean, currently, that concept of the 10-foot bump doesn't really exist to that extent. So I think the intent is to reduce the number of ZBA cases by allowing this. And
Right.
if I understand what you're saying, is you think that it should be even less restrictive.
Well, right, again, we're talking, you know, a fence, you know, you want to make it, you know, make your home, you know, beautiful, you know, make it a decorative fence, having, you know, there should, you know, all out, you know, pull out, you know, all the stops, you know, to make a nice looking fence, you know.
Okay, so if we can just get down to what the difference is between what's proposed and what you're suggesting it should be, because then we can, you know, talk about it and see what the consensus is. What is the difference? Because right now we're saying, as I said, a type B, 50%. That's a requirement, and I forget there's a height restriction.
4 feet
4
for the
feet.
panels, 4'6" for the posts.
Right. So that's if somebody wants something that's not automatically allowed, if they want to have it in there, that's what they have to agree to, right? And so, if I understand, you're looking for something that's a little less restrictive than that.
Right, more,
So what-
you know,
what
more,
is- what are
more
you
organic,
suggesting?
right?
And then we can-
Because I guess also too, the height of the fence too, you know, we're saying private, you know, you're saying semantics, you know. A 4-foot fence, you know, is it really private? Anybody can look over that, right? But a 6-foot fence, you know.
Right,
Yeah,
but
maybe
currently,
on
if
six-
they
I mean,
want a
they're-
6-foot fence, they can put it at the line that's allowed.
Right, but at the secondary, right, you know, it has to be 4 feet max, you know.
Right, and that's what the
Right.
proposal is. Are
Well,
you suggesting it should be?
No,
5?
no, I'm not.
Okay.
You know, I'm just, you know, trying to, you know, I look at this at the requirements and I said, well, we could be more flexible. You know, it could be administratively. Again, the openness, that 50%, I think it could be, you know, 25 to 50. You know, I think that's my comment. If it was in that range or that was the language in 25 to 50% open, that'd be great. You know, you have.
I think that's
you know,
getting to, I think it'd be greater, 50 or greater. There are standards, and I was just showing to her, other communities are looking at 80%. The whole point is that we don't want to see that fence.
Right.
So I think if you want to.
Well,
go
you know,
down to
I
25,
could bring up, you know,
would be
standards
opposed to that.
too, you know, what I see on nationally, you know. I work in projects, you know, not just Illinois, everywhere, and I could bring, hey, look at this neighborhood, and these are the codes, you know, but so that's why I'm bringing, you know, my experience from looking at codes from different states, different cities.
Well, it's really what you want to
and-
see. I think you should take a poll and ask, you know, the planning commission, what do they want to see when they have a fence that sits in front of the building line?
Right, and so we have a proposal in front of us that's been developed, you know, over a number of meetings here. So that's why I'm asking, how far away from that are you in your mind? And you know, we need to get down to something specific here.
Right.
So if you're thinking that the 4-foot limitation is too restrictive, you know, they can do 6 foot back here. So between 4 and 6, what is the number you're thinking? And then we have something to discuss.
No, I don't think it's a, you know, specific number. I'm just saying, you know, just the cement, you know, just the language saying, you know, when I look at this, you know, when you're defining this is privacy, you know, 50% or less, right? And this is open, 50% or greater, you know. You know, to me, you know, I've seen code that's, you know, written, you know, totally transparent, clear, and some code that's kind of like vague, and I see that's, you know, vague, you know. I could, you know, having a fence that's, you know, 40% open space and calling that as a privacy offense, I go like, no, what's private
Okay,
about it,
So again, if I could try to hone in on what your concern is, it's what we're calling it.
Right, it's like what you're calling it,
Okay.
I guess, and then.
Administratively, I'm not trying to make it less clear, but conceptually, if we define these, as I said, as a type A or a type B, so.
It's just a common nomenclature. I'm not getting
I'm
that's
fine
what
with
his
that either
concern
way.
is. I think
I'm
he's-
not recommending that the ordinance itself go that. I'm just trying to make sure that we get that
Right.
clear in everyone's
I'm
mind.
just trying to hear, and I'm just having a hard time understanding really what your concern is, Eduardo. It seems like you're wanting this.
No,
to be more
I think we're
flexible, right?
dictating,
Just
kind of like, not having that, the homeowner say, okay, I like this style fence or whatever, but.
I know, it seems like you're wanting some more flexibility. My concern is the whole reason we're doing this is that you all tell us what the policy is, so we don't have, so we can just say, here's the recipe, this is what we're doing. I don't think you want all that flexibility at the staff level. And so, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm trying to listen to what you're saying, and I hear you saying, well, 50%, maybe it could be 25 to 50%. Or maybe it doesn't have to be.
For
40.
openness, that's my definition.
I know, but I
Once
think we
there's
want
a gap,
number.
it's
We
already.
want a number.
Well, I gave a number, 25 to 50%. If it falls in that range,
And
that's
and
fabulous.
I just said, in my opinion, I think that is not open enough. I
Okay,
think
and
Right.
that gives us something to discuss, all
So
right?
this board needs to decide, are they okay with making it less than 50%?
Right, so that's a point to consider.
Exactly, and that's my
Alright,
comment,
so
That's why I asked, like, where the 50% come from,
It's
the
actually on
standard
the
and-
lower standards. Again, we were just Googling it, 80% open is what a lot of communities, so.
Right,
50
So in
is-
the
50 is
interest
what
of
we
moving
traditionally
forward
done.
here, we have a concept that we can now discuss, all right? Before we do that, it sounded like you might have had some other points. I just want to make sure we get through.
No, I think and then just language of another page, we're calling like the top of the fence, but then we're saying rail. I mean, we should just call it top of the panel.
Yeah.
Versus rail, things,
I'm
those
sorry,
very minor
I meant
things,
to switch it to panel from rail in every instance.
Right, so
in there,
that's,
I'll
and
make
then I
sure
just picked that up, and then I had kind of like a little thing like, okay, that's a rail, that's a picket, that's a bolster, just kind of just making sure it's clear
That'd be
and,
helpful, thank you.
That's
just.
a fair point. So globally, the language in there where it may refer to a rail, what we really mean is top of panel.
And
Well, right,
I
and-
noticed that when we got to the room tonight, and I will make sure to switch all those.
Okay.
We had that suggestion actually, I think, from the zoning board, if I remember.
And then we're, there's also language, so when we call it front yard, are we talking about the primary front yard or the secondary front yard? I don't think that, we should look at that, that's,
In-
page 5 of 9,
Where on the page?
number 2.
The required front yard setback?
Well, number 2 says, in an instance that a residential structure is non-conforming to the required front yard. So we're talking about the the primary
so they're
or
both front
secondary?
yards.
But, should we be more exact on that?
They're
So some.
both front yards.
Well,
So
I know,
they both are
but one is
subject to
called
this.
primary, one's secondary, right? So should we
You're
drop?
saying that's subject to both of them. It doesn't matter, that's
Okay.
both of them.
It's a front yard setback on both sides.
Okay.
Correct.
And it's the same setback. Okay, did we get all the way?
No, yeah, I guess, we covered it. My concerns, kind of.
I lost track of which way we were going here.
So I started, so I don't know if,
Commissioner Gatto, did you have any
No.
comments on this side?
Fine.
Any further points down here? Okay,
Hey, sorry, just one last thing. On page 2, the bottom, the chain link without slats. I think from our workshops that we didn't want uncoated, that we wanted it coated with some sort of rust-resistant material, whether it be vinyl or whatever technology brings us going forward.
Okay.
I don't think we wanted it uncoated. I think we should strike, if I'm,
I think you're,
Yeah, that's correct.
yeah, I think we need to.
I would agree with
strike
that.
the word
It
That,
should
that
just
was
be
the consensus
coated.
as we move forward.
yeah, good call.
And
We
I,
do get a lot of requests for the uncoded, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think one of the concerns last time was, is that too restrictive for the people that currently have the uncoded and they want to, do a new fence with it?
I
Or
agree with you. It looks a
The
lot
cost
better, but-
concerns too. So I know we could definitely strike that and require it to be coded. And if you'll see too, in the prohibited, we did say the slats part is prohibited.
Right.
So when we
Say you had somebody
say,
with a chain link right now that's not coated, and they want to just keep, a portion of the fence or something, I'm just wondering, because I think we have a lot of uncoded.
We have a lot.
so when we say coated, again, and I
Is that
apologize.
vinyl coat?
Right, we talked about vinyl coated, but I believe there was discussion, one of the earlier ones, about either vinyl coated or whatever the current industry
Technology is.
is. So it might look, uncoated, but the whole point was
Rust resistant?
rust
Yes,
resistant.
correct.
So,
Rust,
maintenance so that it,
exactly
what it is.
and that really is, I mean,
Rust
vinyl
resistant.
coated, most people would say looks better. But in reality, it's less, I think, about the, vinyl looks nice as opposed to, it's not gonna turn into it's not gonna look rusty in a couple of years. So it has appropriate.
Rust resistant or something?
In the maintenance, under materials, number 1, it does say it has to be durable, weather resistant,
Rust-proof.
rust-proofed, otherwise protected against damage and decay. So if
Okay.
you'd like, I can specifically say, under allowable materials, chain link without slats, coated or rust resistant. I can clarify
Technology.
that.
Well,
What
to the-
page is that?
To that end, now that you point out
On
that
page 2
language
of
there,
that.
it makes the parenthetical coded or uncoded make more sense, right? Because when you,
As long as it's rust proof.
as long as it's
Yes.
appropriately rust resistant,
Right.
right? And I
So
think
you
just
could leave it that
emphasizing,
way.
yeah, so I'm actually comfortable with the language now that you point that out.
Okay.
Is that,
Me too.
as long as we enforce that administratively, then that's good. But it's worth bringing up one more time to make sure that we're all
Agreed.
in agreement
you.
on it. All right, so I think where we're at right now is we have one open concern here, and that's with respect to the percentage number of openness as we define it for that secondary administrative 10 feet. As proposed in the staff report from all of our workshops, it must be 50% or greater. Commissioner Manny is suggesting that perhaps that number should be 25.
25, within 25, 50, I think that we,
Right, well, the
Acceptable.
current proposed requirement is it must be 50% or greater.
All right,
and-
25 or
And
greater.
you're suggesting perhaps 25 or greater. And I'll just throw it out there, for me personally, I agree with the 50% number. I would not feel comfortable going lower than that. I would just like to run it down here just to make sure we get consensus.
I agree, 50%.
50% works for me.
As well.
50%.
Down the line here?
50%.
50.
Okay, all right. So I just want to make sure that we're giving it
Right, for sure.
due consideration here. So, looks like we've gone through here. The only open question we would have here is whether or not the commissioners feel we have beat this up enough to make a decision, and therefore we would close this hearing. Any objections to closing the hearing, we can do that.
So moved.
Well, I want to make sure we give opportunity for public comment. Do we have any?
Yes, I would ask one question about the 50%. Like Eduardo said, some of those fences that are open probably aren't quite 50%. If his numbers are correct, you got a 3.5-inch slat and a 2.5-inch space, which is open, but that doesn't meet 50%. So how do you remedy that?
It would need to be 50%.
Well, okay, I get that. And another thing, one of his concerns earlier about, open fences, decorative fences. I would take a decorative fence as being something like wrought iron, things like that, or just you know, just something that's just there for looks.
Well, no, right, again, you know.
Okay, but, yeah, I don't know. How would you do that with, like he said, with the pre-manufactured fences?
Right. Again, I went and I measured them.
You know.
So like I said, it just eliminated those fences. I
You know,
can buy
it
those.
really kind of, you know, you're limiting it to basically custom fences. You know,
Well-
somebody would have to come in and build each panel separately to get that 50%.
What I would say is admittedly, it's somewhat restrictive in the types and styles and all that. But that's kind of the trade-off that we're looking at.
Oh, I get that.
In
I
order for, to achieve the objective of giving an administrative discretion, and anything beyond that, if somebody, for instance, wanted to use one of those styles, they can absolutely request a variance from the ZBA.
Yeah.
And,
We could use the work.
you know, so to that end, really, as they discussed earlier, this is a point where we're trying to set policy, and we have to come to some sort of
Oh, I understand, I agree with the
Specific
50%.
number.
I agree with that, I don't have any quarrels about that. I was just wondering about the, you know, the remedies to achieve that 50%.
They make a lot of them. That just happens to be a picture that you don't see them. But I think, Stephanie, we were just looking for this, if you want to report on this.
Yeah. One other quick thing to note too is that people should be getting their permit before they're actually putting the fences up. So hopefully they would have that requirement before they purchase the fence too.
Right.
So that's another thing to remember. We looked in the Planner's Dictionary through the American Planning Association really quickly. And in this, they provide some great definitions from many communities all over the United States that have good definitions, and we often use this as a source to make our definitions for our zoning ordinance. And all of the definitions in here for open fence list at least 50% open, another lists 75, and one even lists at least 90% open.
Nothing less than
So
50.
nothing in here is less than 50 for the definition of open fence. And again, this is kind of the best practices where we get our definitions from, and we rely on this as a very good source for those types of definitions.
Okay, it's good to know the basis and the rationale. Thank you for your comments. So we're done with public comment now, and now I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Stanton, second.
Second.
Commissioner Gatto. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Opposed, same side. Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. Public hearing is now closed. And unless I'm mistaken, I believe we have worked through all of the open items, and the consensus was that we could move to a motion. I would, however, like to run through any of the adjustments to the proposed ordinance that's in the file.
Yep.
Do you have a summary of those?
I sure do. So the first thing was making sure that the prohibited fence materials reflects glass/reflective materials. I didn't mean to do that pun, actually. But,
That was a good one.
Puns are prohibited.
hey, puns are good. The next one was that we want to add a maximum between the grade and the bottom of the panels. So I will find a place to add that in where it makes sense, and I can even add that to the graphic as well, so it's very clear on the graphic.
And the number, the consensus
6
was
inches
6 inches?
is what we chose. And the last thing was removing the word decorative, so that it just says open fence, not open/decorative in all instances. And I'm going to replace all the instances where you see rails with panel.
And that definition meant top of the panel, right?
I'm sorry?
The highest point, right? So if we have like a sunburst type fence.
Yes, it would be the top of whatever that panel is.
Okay.
Would you like
Top-
a graphic showing
No,
that
no,
too?
no,
Okay.
just making sure we're all talking about
But
the
we want the
same thing.
reflective one in
All
the
right.
ordinance.
Yes, for sure. Put that picture in.
That covers it, I believe, right?
I think so.
Okay.
Unless you have anything else to add.
No, I don't. Okay, so with that, I'd like to entertain a motion on this matter.
Commissioner Stanton, I'd like to make a motion to recommend the village board approve text amendments to Section 2, definitions in Section 3.h, permitted encroachments in required yards of the zoning ordinance related to regulations for fences as indicated in staff's draft text amendments dated 12/15/2017.
With the changes
With the change.
as
We'll have
discussed.
to say as noted by staff.
With the changes as noted by staff.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. So moved. Seconded by Commissioner Croner. Could we get a roll call vote, please?
Augustiniak,
Aye.
Gray,
Aye.
Gatto,
Yes.
Manny,
No.
Engel,
Yes.
Curran,
Yes.
Stanton,
Yes.
Croner,
Yes.
Shaw.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you. And I believe that concludes our regular business for this evening. Do we have good of the order?
Yes, sir. We have an announcement, and I'm not going to steal her thunder, so Stephanie would like to make an announcement this evening.
All right. I want to let you all know that I have accepted a position with the Village of Orland Park, and my last day at Tinley Park will be on the 5th of January, so I'll be here for your meeting on the 4th. But it's been a real pleasure working with you all. Some of you for a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, but it's been great to get to know you all and be able to serve the community that I live in as well and be a part of all these great projects. And I'm excited to see what you all do. So thank you.
What position are you taking?
The position's called Senior Planner / Project Manager.
I applied for it.
Oh, you did?
That's so funny.
Sorry.
I just got the email today, too. That's funny. Did you just accept it? Yeah.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Well
Yes.
deserved. Well deserved.
You will
It's our loss.
definitely be missed here. Very much. I sincerely appreciate all the hard work you put in here in advancing everything.
You could see me at the podium, so you never know. I'm still a
We're going to
resident.
get her on a committee.
You don't have, you
I
don't
was
have
gonna
to
tell
move
you
there, right?
afterwards, but I'll say it on the record that I thought your Christmas lights are beautiful.
Oh, thank
So-
you. My husband did them. He's,
Aren't they beautiful?
yeah.
That should be on a magazine cover.
Next year, I think it's going to be even more lights and colors and things.
And when he could be like, what's the guy's name? Griswold?
Hopefully not that crazy.
All right,
I'll
so-
let him know. Thank you.
Well, it's a big loss to the village. You know,
Paula,
I'm
what are you
torn.
gonna do?
Huh?
What are you gonna do?
You know, I'm really torn because I think this is a very good
Yeah.
for Stephanie.
Yeah.
And I told her that. And, you know, I don't, hopefully she doesn't read that as I'm not completely upset and devastated. But, you know, you have to look at this as what is right. There's always your first job, and there's always a second job, and there's always a third job. And every time you leave, I think leaving here is hard because this group of people is amazing. You included, but I gotta tell you, our staff is amazing. We have, and I've worked for a long time, this is, and it sounds like it's easy to say because I'm saying it in front of you, but this is the best staff I have ever worked with. And that is obviously due to Stephanie's credit. She's been wonderful from the day I got here, so. It's gonna be a big hole, big shoes to fill.
Tall shoes.
Tall shoes to fill, but you have to look out what's right. And so this is good for her, and things will march on. And I know where to find her.
We couldn't offer her a similar position?
She does say that. We're in evaluation, and her position here is senior planner. So, but this is a good opportunity. It's all, you know, in planning, your breadth of experience is what makes you. You know, she's learned a lot here, and she'll learn a lot there. And every project she does, she learns new ways of looking at it. So other good of the order. Most of you probably read about this, the South Street, I kept telling you about the South Street Boulevard project. That project is dead. We could not come to terms on the incentive, and so as of now, that project is dead. However, that doesn't mean that all the work that we're doing in the downtown area, that's pretty much where our focus is. We've been working with Lakota on the plaza plans. We saw a lot of you at the open house 2 weeks ago. So thank you for coming. I think that was a very successful open house. We gathered a lot of information on that. I always look at the bright side of things. The South Street is dead, but what that's doing right now is it's re-energized North Street proposal. And the best part of that is that we can really look at that in tandem with the plaza, because that was going to be somewhat of a difficult situation because we were much further along on the South Street project than we were on the North Street project. And to do those at different timings, the plaza and the North Street, we really need to do the construction and the planning for those together. So Lakota is working on all that. In addition, another project, Bremen Cash Store, has been rejuvenated. We're in discussion with them regarding their financials and pro forma. So right when we get back at the first of the year, we have a meeting set up with them to talk about how to get that project going. That's a much smaller, 39 units, 5,000 square foot on the first floor. So very beautiful architecture that they presented. So I think we'll be excited about that. We had a couple interviews this week for the wayfinding RFP. We have a recommendation coming out of our small committee, and that'll be going to the Marketing and Economic Development Committee third week in January, I believe it is. That is handling not only the wayfinding signage for downtown, but the village at large. So that's a big project. As we were talking about software, that's my most important project for the department. And so the RFPs, I got them, like I said, was it yesterday? I'm losing track. So right after we get back from holidays, we'll do our interviews. I think we got 9. We got a lot. I had 3 interviews today for a building official. I had held off doing those interviews because I really wanted the next community development director to hire their own building official. But our search for a community development director has not gone well. So we did make an offer to someone. We thought that was going to be accepted, and it was not accepted. So we are back to having to work with me for a while until we can find an alternative. So I went ahead and I want to get the building official hired because we really can't wait any longer. So I had 3 interviews today. We have 1 more to interview, and then hopefully we'll get somewhere on that. Residences and Studio Q, that made its way through board, so that's all done. We haven't heard when they're ready. I mean, they're all going to be working on the plan. Studio Q is in there. They're fine. Residences, what they'll do is start working on the construction plans. McDonald's is a project that will be at your next meeting, and it's similar to the McDonald's project you had on Harlem, where it's 2 lanes going through.
The drive-through.
Drive-through, yep. And so, but it's actually, I feel like sometimes I'm blessed. I'm blessed to have worked with Stephanie, but it's actually, if there was going to be a time, this is a good time, because we don't have any heavy projects breathing down our neck right now. What we've been doing is working on some long-range plan projects, like the text amendments. We've been working on the legacy text amendments. We worked on these, try to get these things done. So it's an appropriate time. Not a good time, but it's an appropriate time. Any questions about
When's
anything?
construction going to start on that new McDonald's? On the first McDonald's that we've already approved?
We thought it would have been done, but they submitted.
I've done 2 reviews of their building permit plans, and I think the ball's back in their court in case they need one final revision, or if they got their permit, I can check and let you know if you'd like.
They actually improved the plans on the landscaping from what.
Yeah, I remember there was one island in the drive-through that they were going to put some sort of stone or block in because they didn't think that they were going to be able to put plant material in it. They actually were able to come back and put plant material in that. So we won't have any just stone islands there. That would be nice.
So really quick, I want to go back to this, and if any other commissioners are interested in chiming in, you're more than welcome. I would just want to bring up a point on the South Street project. I will just say for my own part, I'm a little disappointed that the village couldn't come to agreement with the developer on that, considering I don't know exactly how long, but I believe it's been almost a decade or so in the works. And I do know, considering how short-staffed we are, the hours that you guys have put in on that, and it's far more than hours. It's many, many hours, multiple revisions. And I'm sure it will come out just exactly how far apart the village and the developer were on coming to agreement on this. When it does, I certainly hope that it was not a narrow gap, because that would be very disappointing from my part. Because that's a very important piece of property for the village downtown, and to think that we let all that effort on both sides slip through the cracks over a minor gap would be very disappointing. To that end, if you look at the ownership of the properties down there on South Street, I think there's about a dozen or so. The developer and the village own or control, a split of them. So, and I believe the village's parcels are in the middle. So now we're kind of in a situation where that, as proposed, appears to be dead. But now what are we going to do? So the whole situation, from my perspective, I was looking forward to having that come before the Plan Commission, and we could move that forward. So as that becomes public, I certainly hope the gap is very wide, which would make that falling through seem more reasonable. So that's what I have to say on that. Any further comments from the rest of the commission? Okay. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Move.
Second.
Second, Commissioner Curran. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.